To my right is Mary Heilmann, who I had the extreme pleasure of working on an exhibition with here at the museum not that many years ago, but longer than I had suspected. And to my far right, Cheryl Donegan, who also did an amazing show here at the museum, which ended in, I think, one of the most important fashion shows I've ever seen. And so I would like to, I'm just going to say one thing, which is interesting to me, and I don't know whether it's at all pertinent to either of you or the conversation. But Mary, you have a classic West Coast education in your background.
Right.
And you have a classic East Coast education in your background. I'm just wondering, did it change who you are? Did it change the kind of art you're making?
To come here, you mean?
Yeah.
To first be a Cali and then to come here to New
Yeah.
York? Yeah, that's a big part of the story. I'm in San Francisco. I go to first Santa Barbara because of surfing. Hello. I'm a spectator sport for me. I was a writing major. I was doing literature. And so then I went up to Berkeley to study ceramics with Peter Volkas. And I wanted to move to LA to be part of the Los Angeles art scene, but figured out that that wouldn't work because a lot of reasons. And so I had a couple of people I already knew in New York. I had been to New York to visit a few times while I was at undergraduate school. So Richard Serra was at Yale, and I went up there to visit him and Chuck Close, who I met at that time. So yes, it totally changed everything. The LA scene was really very happening and really good art at Rocher and all those guys, Larry Bell, and then I get to New York, and I'm loving those guys, Smithson and Don Judd and Dan Flavin. So I thought, oh, well, I'll be in that gang, and that was a little bit harder to negotiate. But it worked out because, you know, playing the game and having the conversations and getting into the fights, arguments, pleasant, smiley arguments, was part of the deal.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm New England. I was raised outside of Worcester, Massachusetts, so going to Providence, Rhode Island was like really like the next step in like the glamour. So, but yeah, I went to RISD, and you know what was great about RISD was it was really like kind of an old-fashioned like Bauhaus education of just, you know, they'd get you in there and just have you work with materials and experiment and like problem solve with materials. It was very hands-on, and it was very much about being like we used to call ourselves like studio rats, like never, you know, work until the guard kicked you out. So it was very much about like just making things, and it was the early 80s, and so there was no question, but you'd go to New York. There was even graffiti in the bathroom of the painting building of like a baby with a paintbrush, and you know, all the faculty's faces graffitied on the bathroom door, and all with a sign, New York, you know. So there was no question, but you had to come to New York, and it was like the slaves of New York days. So, but when I first got to New York, it was also the height of like sort of the West Broadway scene of, you know, neo-abex, you know, appropriate, Julian Schnabel and all that. And I just sort of felt like I didn't have the nice enough clothes to go to West Broadway. So I just started seeing performance art in the East Village because it felt, you know, going to like King Tut's Wawa Hut, it felt more comfortable. And, but yeah, it was like, one thing that I think about being, you know, in Mary's situation is thinking about being inspired by nature and being inspired by color and landscapes where I don't have that, you know, and sometimes you know, because just being in the city the whole time.
Well, one of the things, I mean, both of you are multitaskers, for sure. It's like, So both of you are multitaskers. It's like the Australian expression when you ask somebody what they do, they'll say, "Oh, I'm a bitzer," and you'll say, "A bitzer," and they'll go, "A bit of this, a bit of that." I know you do video, you do painting, you do performance. Mary, you do painting. Oh, you do sculpture. You do sculpture. You do ceramics. I mean, it seems like nothing is not possible to either one of you in terms of your reach.
Yeah, I didn't start as a painter, you know. In fact, it was when I was at school in graduate school, painting was way dead. We hated the painters. They were really conservative. And I actually had to take some painting classes because I was an English major as an undergraduate, and Elmer Bischoff was my teacher, and I said, "Oh, what should I do if it's all like, when I try to mix the paint, it all ends up brown?" He said, "Make something brown." So that appealed to me. So then, let me think. What was this about? It was about making all different kinds of art. And so then, here's a cool story. So then David Hockney shows up as the visiting artist in 1965 with his blonde hair and his orange suit. And so they had a meeting of all the people, and they'd said, okay, only painters can take David Hockney's class. And in the big room, the people started just drifting out of the room. David wasn't there. And only the sculptors were left. And they said, how many want to take the class? And we all raised our hands. And he was brilliant. He was a great teacher at like early postmodernism. So that worked out. The painting was very conservative. We didn't want, we hated painting. And then I get to New York, can't get any attention for my work. Oh, it was sculpture by that time, right. And so I start telling everybody at Max's Kansas City that I was a painter and that I studied with David Hockney. And they go, oh.
Yeah, I think this might be a theme developing. I mean, this whole idea of like painting is dead and you really can't do that, and what do you think you're doing? I mean, I definitely got the same kind of messages, not at RISD, but coming to New York, the place they told you had to get. And then you get here and they're like, what you do doesn't matter. How did you think it would? Mm-hmm. And so I think then, I know at Hunter College, where I went to graduate school, the idea of like, you have to really, think about what you're doing, and you have to know theory, and you have to deconstruct. And, there was this kind of freak out where I thought like, oh, we have to find another way, and you can't paint. So then video and things like that occurred to me to do. But when I really look back now with, the benefit of many years, I think, wow, it was all a big analogy to be able to make something with or about or in relationship to the painting I always really wanted to be making. And so not that this was a substitution, but a relation, and I still think, no matter what I do, whether it's making, a print or even a pattern, a video, they're all in relationship to, a kind of a foundational love of wanting to make paintings. And, I think I'm sort of meandering my way back, to doing it in a more traditional way. But it's always been about that, about being in relation. So everything I do, I feel it's about relation.
And in terms of when someone asks you, what do you do? Do you say, I'm a painter? Or do you say, I'm an artist? Or do you say, I'm a videographer? Or what's the response?
Artist. I'm an artist.
That's like actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to say I'm an artist. I mean, I tend to shy away from saying I'm a video artist just because sometimes I feel like the technological expertise that implies, at least in my own mind, I feel like is a bit too much of like a claim, you know, because I don't really like promote that about, like, even the way I approach video is like a technological sort of concern. And so it's more comfortable to say artist, but a lot of times I think for me, I say painter almost so that I can claim it for myself. You know, it's still that sort of reassurance that like, it's okay what you do, you know.
But you feel no need for paint.
Well, I mean, right now, like I say, I sort of feel like I'm looking for relationships. So even though if I'm working with dye, which I am right now, I'm doing a lot of things with dyeing. I mean, it's liquid, it transforms, it's unexpected. You know, you kind of never know what you're gonna get in a funny way. So I sort of feel like those are all qualities that I really enjoy about what it is to be a painter. I mean, at least by, you know, certain definitions. And so it doesn't always have to be like, and for me it's almost never like oil paint squeezed out of a tube. It's sometimes other things. But I always feel it's more of that, it's like looking at painting not in a strategic or ironic way, but in a way that sort of just, you know, tries to build a more complex and rich relationship rather than something that's just limiting, you know, like, oh, it's just ironic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Mary, with your paintings, it's like when I had the time to spend with them and you, the one thing that I got really obsessed with was the fact that your surfaces are alternately seductive and resistant. You know, and it's like some of them you just want to, you know, it's hard to keep your tongue in your mouth. And others, it's like, ow. I wonder about that kind of, is that something you're aware of doing? Is it something that, how does it happen in the painting process?
Well, yeah, I really do like playing with the materials. I actually don't think I thought of the, let me think about that. The physically seductive aspect of them. Some of the imagery I play with is like that, but I do play with the material so that the surfaces are different from different parts of the piece. But yes, and they are they are not pictures. The whole story isn't the inside of the frame either. I'm working, you know, as you notice from the new museum, I really work with playing with the space as part of the energy of the piece. And I always loved architecture, even as a little kid. My dad was an engineer, and he said, no, don't be an architect. You just have to sit, and this is in the 40s, you just have to sit in a room drawing plans. And I thought, okay, I don't want to do that. So, but I love architecture and playing with spaces and arranging shows. And my new whole thing is going to be the home arts, so that I'm going to be designing the shows as though they were household interiors.
Well, this is where the furniture line comes in.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And even that started as making the place where the work is shown pleasant and comfortable, so that people would sit down and stay a while and talk to each other. So that was like about social discourse when that started out.
Do you foresee a day when there'll be Mary Heilmann home stores across America?
No, I won't do that, because running a business, as we're finding now with the art world, takes as much talent, way more talent, than doing the work.
Yeah.
So, like I do pottery, bowls and cups and saucers and dishes, and people have said they could be produced. And I do work with a partner to make them, to cast from originals, but to take it to being a production isn't interesting.
Yeah, right.
So that keeps us kind of busy. But we make them be expensive, so you don't buy tons and tons.
But I think that's what I was referring to in terms of like relationships. Like one thing that I love about Mary's work and so admire and I'm really inspired by is just like what you're mentioning about the relatedness in her painting to spaces that people are commonly in, not rarefied spaces or like singular spaces, but everyday spaces and spaces that people, so you see the work and you think about its relationship to your own space, your own interior, even though it's super heightened, it's so in relation. I think, there's a certain thing we were taught that art was so singular and so rarefied and so, there's nothing else like it. And this idea to push to make something that stood apart. And I feel like that was such a sort of intimidating and urge that kind of cut people off from things. And so I kind of want to restore, with things I do and things I'm interested in and art I admire, like how it's in relation to people and their daily lives, their own environments. And I see that's why I'm so inspired and admiring of Mary, because I think, in all her stuff, that's what you feel.
Yeah, I've been calling them the home arts. My practice is the home arts. We'll see. We'll see about that.
But I think in the green room, you were showing me an image of a textile, and you were talking about Matisse, and I always, admire. What I get out of Matisse a lot is the idea of like the motif, and that you can have a motif in many forms and keep exploiting it, keep doing things with it, whether it's and it's the essence of the decorative, that you can kind of keep reiterating something and keep getting more out of it, not less.
What have you seen change the most since you came to New York in terms of your profession?
Oh, I love that question. And I'm a person that's always trying to look for the good side of anything. And I guess the main interesting thing, which I am bending over backwards to try to deal with, is when I first hooked up with Hauser and Wirth in the 90s, early 90s, I could just pick up my well, I didn't have a cell phone yet, but I could pick up the phone and get Ivan, and now that enterprise is so massive and huge, and the whole art enterprise is that, well, I guess that's why recently I've really become obsessed with the home arts, with making stuff which is downscale, or playing with big scale and little scale, and also trying to figure out how to make something that's worth less than a couple of $100,000. A cup and saucer. They're kind of expensive, but and I'm glad, actually.
Well, I guess I'm right now like really thinking about the idea, and have been for a while, about weakness, because I sort of feel like what's disturbing to me about the art world, as it is in contemporary culture in general, is this idea of strength and projecting this, kind of singularity and strength. And I kind of want to insert this idea of weakness, but that the weakness can be strong. And so what I mean by that, just to talk about home arts or small scale or cheap things, I sort of find that there's a valor in that, in this sort of gentleness, or, something that is maybe doesn't seem to be completely dominating, world domination was never part of my MO. So I just sort of feel like I don't really understand how it got like that, where this idea of dominance and these more typical ideas of strength are so valorized. And I sort of want to valorize a different type of way of being, that maybe is more purposefully weak, but that it brings you in closer, and it might have a different message for you than sort of hitting you over the head.
Well, your work always seems to be teasing the amateur, teasing the bricoler. You know, there's an intentional. You get very, very close, and then it seems you instinctively turn your back on that direction and go in the opposite direction. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
No, very much, because I mean, you know, to honor the bricoleur, I mean, we're talking about, you know, the decorative, the related. I mean, these are things that I think are restorative. They sort of engage, and I mean, everyone, you know, likes to. I mean, it's fun to make things, and there's a joy in it, and I think that, you know, that joy kind of gets killed by all the professionalism and the expertise. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that we're not experts at what we do. We spend so much time doing it. How could we not be expert? But at the same time, you know, there is a kind of too much professionalism. It sort of ruins everything.
Well, you're both saying the same thing in a way, you know, and it's, I mean, also, I'll move off of this very quickly, but I mean also the rise of the super dealer and the sweepstakes that, you know, every year it's a different Rose Bowl parade and there are different roses on the floats. And it can get a little jarring after a while, and I'm sure being an artist.
You're talking art fairs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you talking art fairs?
We can feel the vibe of Florida already.
I just go to art fairs to see what people are wearing. Let's face it. I'm just like, I can't even look at the art. I'm like, oh my God, look at her. You know, it's like, because you gotta have pleasure, please.
Well, I mean, the art fairs that are doing so many negative things, and one of them is exhausting, for dealers exhausting the artists who they are there to represent by, you know, like more inventory. So, you know, it's insane at a certain point. But how do you feel you're part of a larger artistic community? Artistic's a funny word in front of community, but
I'm a part of the artistic community?
yeah.
Yeah, I still am. I don't know. I like it that art, which for me was kind of humble and holy and spiritual and magical, is now having an effect on the whole world, on the economic world. I mean, I haven't come to a conclusion about that, but I think it's interesting, and I think about it all the time in a pretty positive way.
Cheryl, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, have you made the rounds of the art fairs? Has your work represented you?
You know, I just find sometimes I get a little dissonance because, you know, I'm like, I'm not so much, I feel like, sort of not neither fish nor fowl. I sort of feel a little old to be an adolescent, but, you know, I'm in that awkward stage, you know, of like, you know, I've been treated really well and then, you know, experienced like utter, like, we don't know you, you know, so I don't know sometimes. That's why I just stick with the artists. You know, I've been, like I said, I've been treated really well, and it's really gratifying, and then sometimes you just get the cold shoulder, and you're like, what did I do, you know? So who knows? That's why I stick with the artists.
I don't know, somehow the notion of communities does seem important to me, and a lever for strength among artists. And this simple knowledge, I mean, I think everybody who wandered into some area of art as a profession has come to realize that it makes your world a lot smaller, which to me is a wonderful thing in terms you can end up in almost anywhere in the world, and there's unity among artists, and there is a conversation always waiting to be had. Do you feel that?
Yeah. And wherever you go, there's going to be someone that knows you. Get ready.
What keeps you making your work?
Well, I get ideas and then I want to see them. However, lately I've been a little bit overwhelmed because of being socially busy, because of the busy art world. And so I started out as a writer, so I often have thought, it's kind of going away now, to stop being bothered making all this stuff and just sit down and write. And just the concept really does appeal to me. However, you need, when I'm writing, when I'm typing away, I imagine the images of things that go along with the stories, and then I feel like making them.
Got it.
I'm really into producing these ceramics, which I'm making these cups and saucers, which are they're really, really thick because we're casting them, so you can make them way thicker than the originals were. And so when you drink your little cup of coffee, thing is really heavy. You have to open your mouth to get it around the cup. So it's like really hot and provocative, and I'm interested in that.
As are we all.
Yeah, I was like, that sounds interesting to me.
I'll take orders after. See, new art world.
Cheryl, you have your first, is it safe to call it a retrospective or is it a survey?
Yeah, it's just how old you're feeling on a particular day.
No, but in Aspen, how do you feel about having a lot of work on review?
It's been super helpful, I have to say, because, you mentioned before it's kind of like disparate journey and seeming like, unrelated parts, because there's been periods where I've shown a lot and then where I haven't shown, or I've shown in Europe or shown in other places in America, but not New York. So there's kind of like gaps in the signal. And so the curators that I've worked with that have been really smart, Johanna Burton here, shout out, put together, to sort of leave the trail of breadcrumbs of like, no, she's just not wandering aimlessly in the wilderness. Like, these are, breadcrumbs, and to follow trails and put things together. It's been super helpful for me, and actually very fortifying for me, because it's just helped tell the story, And so I feel like that's been really helpful. Because you asked a question earlier of Mary, like, why do you keep making it? And I think for me, because I do tend to, as I'm mentioning, have these ideas that I feel are related but might appear disparate, but like then I make the next thing, and it's almost like you see yourself coming around the corner, and you're like, oh, it is me, And I mean, especially as you get older, like as I'm feeling like, you can't have those experiences when you're 27 and you only have one or two bodies of work. But once you start to get more and more bodies of work, it's like you start to keep meeting yourself, but a different form of yourself. And, it's sort of a miraculous feeling, like as you just start to build a personal language or history of discovery. And it's wonderful to work with curators who can sort of help focus the lens for people. So I find it really rewarding. So call it a retrospective. I'm just happy, I'm happy to be in that dialogue.
There's something incredibly luxurious for the viewer when they are able to see, I always think it's a funny expression, a body of work. But indeed it is a body of work. And it allows you to really understand quite how complicated it's like living a life through these things, and to get to know the artist, which I think is ultimately a fallacy, through their work. You do get to know the impulses. You do get to know the anxiety of the line. You get to know the tenderness of the brush stroke. All of this is evident, but it's very important to gather it together. I was talking to Neil Jenny last night, who said that he has had an exhibition in his studio since he first took over his studio. And it was like, whoa. And he said, it was really fascinating. that's a real commitment on his part.
Yeah, you should go there. It's great.
Yeah, I want to.
He's so eccentric and so brilliant. He's today, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And this is another thing about, do you find that the times are better for you as time passes? Is this a better period or a worse period for you to be making work?
It's great. It's way better. You know, I was really sad all the time before. I didn't really realize. I looked at that Red, Yellow, and Blue show that just happened, the show of paintings of mine from the 70s. I mean, I just got a rush. They were so great. And it's almost as if they just happened. And that while I was intently doing them, and the people bought them all, I didn't think, I didn't get any joy out of it. So that's different now.
And you have a show up now at the Flavin Institute
Out in the Long Island, yeah.
right, the South Fork.
That's right. And so yes, it's just near East Hampton, I will say. I never call it the Hamptons because I'm more interested in the other part of that area, but the other culture of that area. But the art culture is cool. And to be able to do something in a space that was Dan Flavin's is amazing.
Yeah.
And he was a pioneer of this art world that we're in now.
Cheryl, in terms of...
Well, I'll tell my favorite joke about painting. What's the hardest part about painting? The first 20 years. So when you said you made all your paintings from the 70s that you made and everyone's enjoying and you're thinking just how miserable you were when you were making them,
Yeah.
I totally relate.
Yeah, it was so strange.
So that's, I sort of feel like I'm repeating a comment I made earlier, but, no one tells you, like, I'm sort of appropriating a line from, it gets better, but just that you build, you just, I don't know what it is, or maybe you're more gentle on yourself, or hardly, but nevertheless, there's the illusion you're gentler on yourself.
I want to read something that you wrote in our fascinating... This is actually a great publication, I have to say.
Props to Johanna and team.
This is from Cheryl's show here at the museum, and it's a number of topics, and then you respond to the topic. And the topic is surface, and it says, oh yeah, surface is the best. I like texture and non-texture. Surface is what gives something physical presence. It's the constant between the virtual and the physical. I think that's just so smart, and it's also, I think it also applies to human beings. Surface, we all come with our surfaces, and I think we all know how to exercise them.
Well, I just think, surface has qualities. And so when we look at painting, we're looking at surface and we're describing those qualities to ourselves. And when we describe those qualities, we really have to think and feel and to describe it to ourselves or just experience it through our eyes and what that tells us. It is like people. Right. What are your qualities? And how do I get to know you through your qualities, through experiencing your qualities? And I think that's, when we're talking about business, business, that gets so ignored. Like, what are the qualities?
We're now approaching we're within the last 10 minutes. And I'd like to ask each of you to just kind of talk about what you feel the essence of this moment in time is for you and for your work.
Any thoughts?
This moment?
It's a complicated moment.
Terrifying and exhilarating. And exhilarating and terrifying. It's hard to talk about collapse in a positive way. I've been thinking a lot in the last 24 hours about that image that we might have all seen in the cover of the New York Times of the tax bill, but then with all that marginalia snaking. And I feel like I need to go home and print that out and put it on the studio wall, because there's something really I want to think a lot about that, and I think it really relates to painting. Just think about that as a composition. It's like you've got the block that is like the regular and the stable, and then you've got this marginalia like creeping in, and it's cut off, and you can't read it, and it's crossed out. And now it's law. It's like, that's what law looks like. And so I'm thinking, that means something for us all. Like, that means something for art. Like, that is an image. I think that's the moment where it's like, you've got this thing that seems stable. It ain't stable, because here comes this marginalia that's very disruptive, but very kind of like attacking, but also complete. I don't know. I got to think more about it. But I think that image that was on the Times kind of is our moment. I'm just going to go with that. I don't say it's pretty, but there's something fascinating. I think we can make use of it.
Yeah, it's cool. Is that today's paper?
It was yesterday's?
Saturday, okay. Because I'm away from my place, I don't have the paper. But one thing I will say about that, which is super and positive, the graphics of the New York Times, now that they're trying to catch up with and be equal to digital media, is awesome. The paper, and like as you described this, I'm in love with it, and I know it's about horrible stuff.
It's horrible, but
Yeah.
I really think like it's like, wait, like all they've been, it's like this I mean, consider who did it. We know it's bad, but just that as an image, it's. Cause I'm thinking, is that Talmudic, like where they're just like writing in the margins and like exceptions, or is it like disruptive, or is it support? It's not really supportive, but there's something about the collision of those two things, of the structured way of doing things, and then this kind of like insertion into it is something's going on with disruption, and it could be productive.
Yeah, imagine digital graphics being equal to the Mona Lisa-ish. I mean, a lot of people are going to get that rush out of just looking at that.
But it's really funny, because I feel like there's something I wanted to say earlier about your painting, like where, the painting is permanent, but it seems like it could move or even fall apart at any second. It's got that thing of like where the permanent and the impermanent are like caught in that second. And something about, so when you say, oh, the Mona Lisa, so permanent under bulletproof glass, and digital graphics flowing by any second, changing all the time, like when those, there's like a collapse of those things, or something, like if they could digitize the Mona Lisa and she'd like wink at you, like when you'd walk by. I don't know. Now I'm just going crazy.
Yeah, you're going on, but that's cool. I mean, that's what shows us that there is hope, that the message that picture in the Times communicates, ultimately, I think will have an effect, hopefully. But
how could it not?
There's a chance. Everybody's going to see that, even the bad guys. And then, the rich guys that want to get all the money and really make strong and permanent the new feudalism, which means that all the poor guys are going to die, and all the robots will do all the work, and they'll just be sitting around shooting dope and dying too.
But that's what I mean about this disruption of like the weak and the strong, like, right? I mean, it's like this inversion of like the strong are actually incredibly weak, and the people who have been in positions of weakness actually might have something to teach us. So it's a very interesting moment of like where of definitions of what is weak and what is strong. And I think that, so when you talk about like, homey art, which we thought, oh, that's so weak. It's like, no, actually, there's incredible strength and power there where we didn't expect it, but we've been maybe taught to not look for the qualities we ought to be looking for. So that's why I think there's hope, because we're looking at different qualities people we thought had qualities that were favorable are turning out to not really be all that good in terms of their qualities. So I sort of think it's a powerful moment of change, but it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, I think I also love the point you made about design. And you also make it a statement about design in the paper, which I don't have time to read. But I think, design is changing things as well. It's become a much more important part of our everyday access to understanding. And maybe this is something you can incorporate into the advertising materials for the home store. But I thank you both. We're like, the clock is counting down. It's been wonderful being able to talk to you and share your thoughts with us. And I am enormously appreciative that you got together on this chilly, maybe it's beautiful out now.
Yeah, we love global warming. I want to just say, like, one positive cultural thing to really feel and embrace is the kind of enterprise that the new museum is. And museums are trying to be a nurturing, fun, exciting, happy place for all the people to be in. And I think the new museum's a pretty good role model for that type of thing.
Thank
the
you.
modern is
Hear, hear.
catching up. And we both were talking about how we went to museums when we were little, right? You said that, yeah. And I remember that, being really, really important.
Well, that's great. Thank you
there's
so
hope.
much.